Good evening. Welcome to Live United. Living United, an opportunity to hear about all the wonderful things happening here in the Monadnock region that make a difference in the lives of our citizens. And one of those main programs out there, one of those main nonprofits is our very own Monadnock United Way, which supports so many of the efforts that you see featured on this show. Today I'm joined by Cameron Tease. Cameron is our Resource Development Director at Monadnock United Way. So welcome, Cam.
Thanks, Kelly.
Nice
to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Thank
You're one of my favorite people. Right. So to have a chance to sit and actually just converse about our work and the things that we do at the United Way, it's such a nice opportunity, and I think a great way to share with the community what goes on sort of behind the scenes that really supports all of these efforts out there in the Monadnock region. So let's talk a little bit, because we're right in the middle of what's called campaign season.
Kickoffs this week.
Yeah, so kind of walk us through what the campaign looks like, because really it begins far before this, and there's a lot of prep work. It's really year-round. But it becomes more public right about now.
Right. As you well know, we recruited our general campaign chair last January. So Peter Hansel from Filtrine is our campaign chair. We're very pleased to have him, and he has been recruiting volunteers since probably March. We have, when you count people in companies, we probably have 500 volunteers involved in this year's campaign. And so there's a campaign cabinet of volunteers that splits up the various accounts, the Main Street businesses, the larger manufacturers, the hospitals, and these volunteers that are all reporting up to Peter make contact during the campaign. But also, we have loaned employees there's 14 of them this year, from various companies in Keene State who are trained to assist the campaign. And these loaned employees were recruited and went through a one-week training in August. And now their feet are on the ground helping the campaigns at the various companies. So we have pace setter companies. Pace setters run their campaigns before this Thursday's kickoff. And so that on Thursday, we'll be able to give a boost to the campaign by reporting what the pace setters have done. So there was the recruiting of these companies, Badger, Melanson. There's great companies that year after year are like CNS, are pace setters, and then each year we have additional new companies. And then it all leads up to September 15th when we kick off, and the campaign is advertised to the community. We have a lot of hype and excitement about the theme, which we'll probably talk about. And for the next 3 months, until we hit our goal, we will be hard at it.
So let's talk a little bit about the goal and why a goal is set, and what it means in terms of how we then invest in the community.
So, yes, thank you. So the goal this year is $2,030,000. That is a number that, for a community our size, is amazing, as you well know. But it only begins to scratch the surface in terms of all the needs that are there. But that goal was set based on the various programs. There are 48 programs that are funded from last year's campaign. The various programs and the partner agencies that run these programs, letting United Way know that they will be submitting a proposal for funding. And then our allocations committee, our staff, looks at these submissions and makes a recommendation. We end up making a recommendation to the Monadnock United Way's Board of Directors. and they decide based on what we feel we can raise, based on the interest of programs to be funded, what that number is.
So, we have a goal, we have all of these incredible volunteers, and we have these organizations that set the tone for the whole campaign. But why is it important, and how do people really get involved in giving?
There are so many ways to give to the Monadnock United Way. We have found that volunteering is an excellent way to get to know the agencies, to get to know all the things that United Way does, which is beyond fundraising. The leadership that we're providing in the community, the facilitation of various volunteering, the collaboration that comes about through working with the United Way. So volunteering is one way that people learn. I'm really inspired when I mentioned the loaned employee training. And some of those loaned employees are already donors of the Monadnock United Way through their workplace. Others weren't donors. And we have Keene State students, 4 of them that are loaned employees. By the end of that week of training in early August, you would not believe the enthusiasm and how these loaned employees are talking about the various programs that they've seen and how these programs have made a difference. Also, Kelly, it's surprising to many people that they themselves or their families or their friends have been helped by one of these 48 programs. And by the end of the week, the loaned employees are our best advocates. So through volunteering, through getting involved with United Way campaigns, I think it really plants the seeds for long-term just commitment to the Monadnock United Way. You can also get involved in campaigns through your workplace. We would, of that $2 million plus that we've raised for the last 10 years, about 80% of it can be attributed to either companies' generosity in terms of their corporate gifts. Some of them match their employees who give, but 50% of that $2 million comes from employees and their workplace. And oftentimes it's through payroll deduction, but the companies over the years that have allowed us to have campaigns and had their employees involved in those campaigns, it's helped immeasurably in terms of the employees becoming grounded in the United Way as well. And it helps also the companies, because I think those companies see the value in terms of the experience the employees have, the additional appreciation for what our community does and who our community is and what these partner agencies do. And I think the company ends up being stronger as well because their employees have had the experience of being a volunteer, probably been stretched in terms of public speaking, and probably grown in terms of their appreciation for the community and their employer who allowed them and supported them to be part of the campaign.
Those are all such important things, and I think they're the unseen value that goes on out there. I think, you mentioned that the United Way works way beyond fundraising, and that a lot of folks become committed to the United Way. I think they become really committed to our community and our region, and they feel a real sense of belonging, a real sense of accomplishment in knowing that they made a difference perhaps in a family member's life, a neighbor's life, in perhaps their own life, and just for our communities in general. It's so fabulous to see the folks come through, because they often say to me, the volunteers, once you volunteer, you're a lifer. And I think some of that has to do with just the experience that you're talking about. You go through and you feel something that's pretty special. And sometimes, in our day-to-day lives, it's hard to find that kind of feeling because we get so busy, but really knowing that you've done something that's changing the world out there.
Well, I think I'm an example of just what you said. When I came to the Monadnock region in the 80s, I worked at Peerless Insurance, now Liberty, and I was supported by the management and the culture of Peerless to get involved in the community, and specifically the United Way. And since that time in the mid-80s, I have not missed, except for 1 year when I was down in Georgia with Peerless, I have not missed one campaign. And so it's part of who I am. And then the other side of that coin is that I myself, as you know, when I was 40 years old, needed services from several of our partner agencies. And when my son had an automobile accident. And I'll be forever grateful. I was a supporter and a believer in the United Way and those programs before that. Now when I say anybody could need the help, no matter how self-reliant or what kind of resources you have, there are things that happen sometimes that are beyond your capabilities and that of your family. So. Yes, so it's deep ingrained in me, the United Way, and not just because it's the United Way, but because of the partner agencies and getting to realize what these agencies, such as Monadnock Family Services or Home Health Care, Hospice and Community Services, or Southwestern Community Services, you know them, but there's almost 30 agencies and almost 50 programs that we support. And I've gotten to know these agencies and the people and the dedicated people and the difference they make, Samaritans. So the longer you're in it, the more committed you become, actually.
So what would be some ways for folks that are watching tonight, if they can give time, that's one thing you're talking about, and become a volunteer. People can also give. They can give through the workplace, but they can give individually.
Yes. And individually, there's several ways that can be done. MUW.org, our website, we have online giving capabilities, and we really upgraded those capabilities 3 years ago, and we see an increasing number of our donors are donating online, and so that's one way. Another way, of course, is calling the Monadnock United Way or stopping in at 23 Center Street. Because we have a staff of 6 people that are eager to help anybody that has any questions or needs a pledge form, and calling at 352-4209. Catherine and Nikki would be glad to point you in the right direction or send out a pledge form or answer any questions.
And people can give individually. There's town people that are out as volunteers working in the towns to seek out funds and sources out in the communities. There's people that are working with the businesses and our corporate partners. People can also decide whether they want to make a bequest, and bequests have made a huge difference in the past. In some of the years that have been more of a struggle, and it has become more and more challenging to raise the resources, partially because there's so much competition, but there's other changes going on, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if somebody wanted to make a major gift or a bequest to the United Way, how do they go about doing that?
Well, that's a great point, and it's an area that we feel there's great opportunity for us to get that word out. I think if you were going to consider a bequest, getting the advice from an advisor in terms of plan giving, whether it be through a trust or in your will, is very important. And we have such advisors that are affiliated or at least supporters of the United Way, that if anybody wanted references to a few people they could talk to, they could do that. As you said, in the last I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had a number, several significant bequests that have made a huge difference. The Monadnock United Way back in the 90s started a permanent fund, an endowment fund. These bequests could be directly towards the United Way as far as any year's given campaign, and some of them have made a huge difference there. Or they could go to our permanent fund with instructions in terms of how the bequest was to be used. So that's something as well, Kelly, that we want to get more information out about this permanent fund that visionaries, community leaders started for the United Way back in the 90s and has been sitting there and growing, but not necessarily when someone's family member or somebody that has been admired in the community passes, oftentimes we do get memorial gifts, and oftentimes those people know about our permanent fund and indicate it's for the permanent fund. But a lot of people may not know that, and we need to do a better job, and we will.
So people can, again, contact the United Way if they have questions about that type of thing as well.
Yes.
I know that before we jump into challenges and some of the other things going on through the campaign, we thought it might be fun to share some pictures and to show both the volunteers, but if you can also share, you know, these volunteers look like they're having a pretty good time. They got some smiles on their faces. So Dave, if we can pull up the pictures. Well, there we see the staff of the United Way.
This is 23 Center Street, and that's our staff, and Marge Drappa from Impact Monadnock right there in front and center. But we have a great crew, and Kathy Harrington on the right, or on my right, is our president. Gary Custer, our marketing person. I knew Gary as a volunteer back in the 80s. And he was working at Smith's then, and now we're fortunate to have him. There's Catherine Richardson, our donor relations coordinator, Nikki Sauber, who works with volunteers and Collective Impact, and there you are on the right.
So, and then I think these are perhaps folks from one of the workplace.
So we had,
campaigns.
I mentioned our loaned employees, and we had our loaned employee training at Keene State the week of August 8th. During that week, we went over to the Y, and we had some fun activities. And this is at the Y, after we had all jumped into some pit of foam and things, so everybody's kind of, I don't know if those are smiles of happiness or relief, but we had a lot of fun.
So as we roll to the next picture, I just want to comment on that previous picture because our loaned employees, interestingly enough, they're given a week from their employers to come and be trained and work with us, and that's a huge commitment on the part of employers. So shout out to all of them and thank you.
And thank you, and also to the Keene State students who are working or came back from being away for the summer to participate.
Yeah. And our next picture was the co-op.
The co-op is one of our paysetter companies this year. We had the opportunity to speak at 2 of their employee meetings. They're really very enthusiastic about everything, I could tell that, including the United Way. Cheryl Bolaire, who is our Leadership Giving Chair this year and had a story in last year's video about how her family was helped by agencies similar to those that we support. Cheryl spoke to these employees, and I think this is indicative. You can see all their smiles. I think they raised 20% more for this Paysetter campaign than their great campaign last year.
That's super.
Yeah. And so this must be at CNS, and this is some of 3 of the campaign folks, ES3 and CNS employees who run their great campaign. CNS and ES3 affiliates are the largest contributor between the employee campaign and the company match, dollar for dollar. in the Monadnock United Way. And you can see just based on that picture that they're very committed, and they have their own campaign materials. They just, from the top of the company through the ranks, support the United Way's campaign.
And I think our last picture here is folks from perhaps another campaign or volunteers?
I think this might be Southwestern. I should have, I think this must be Southwestern Community Services. They have such a great kickoff each year, an ice cream social, and I make sure I go to it every year because it's just New Hope, New Horizons is involved, and just the spirit of Southwestern. And here's one of our partner agencies.
I was going to say that this is actually a partner agency who's also taking part in developing resources out there for all those other services because they know that the partnership, that they can't do it alone. And I think that's something that all of our partners have discovered is, you know, they're a piece of the puzzle that makes a difference in our community.
And when you think about it, and you know, there are a number of our partner agencies that have this type of campaign, but they don't obviously have corporate matches. I mean, if an agency such as Southwestern or MFS or HCS, if they raise over $10,000, that's from employees. And that's from people that aren't necessarily making a lot of money.
Right.
But it shows, first of all, it shows where their hearts are and how they regard Monadnock United Way. But it also shows that we have leadership givers who are able to give more. But it also shows how important it is that people, you know, even $1 a week through payroll deduction or $5 a week, that's the bread and butter of this campaign.
Well, and we know that to be a leadership giver, it's, you know, approximately $10 a week, and you're a leadership giver, and that that's a huge part of the campaign resources that are generated, and through that, that's what then goes back out into the community to support these. Well, it's really more than 48 programs because we also support 211. Which is a whole, you know, statewide referral line supported through the United Way system. Sure. We wouldn't have something like that if it wasn't for the resources that come in from our wonderful donors and then go back out through the United Way.
That's an excellent point in terms of that the donations to the Monadnock United Way are supporting these 48 programs, but so much more. Impact Monadnock is an example. United Way, Monadnock United Way is the backbone of the initiative for early childhood development, getting kids off on the right foot. That's known as Impact Monadnock. And so that type of support, when you support the Monadnock United Way, you're also supporting Impact Monadnock. What about all that? We're sitting at the table of so many initiatives in the Monadnock region. You're often the one sitting at that table. That the donations to the Monadnock United Way empowers us to be at the table and represent the human services and the leadership and the expertise and the resources that we have. How many organizations anywhere can say that they have 500 volunteers in any given year helping? So we bring a lot of credibility as well to the table. So you mentioned leadership givers, though, and I'd like to go back to that because even though the folks that I was referring to in the partner agencies are so important to our campaign, leadership givers or those couples or individuals that give $500 or more, they represent 43% of what we raised last year. Very important. And so since the mid-'80s, we have had a leadership giving effort, and it's grown from, I think, $100,000 the first year. I think Joe Bowdy was the campaign chair for the leadership giving when it started back in '85 or '86. And today it's close to $900,000 raised through those leadership givers. 700 of them. But the other side of that coin again is we have 5,000 donors to last year's campaign. So, but those 700 are very important to us. So it's a balancing act. Every donor, no matter what size, is important, and we couldn't do what we do without them.
You know, it's interesting, I've thought about this so many times, you know, that we have, and one of the things that people should be aware of is that the services supported through the United Way cover all of the Monadnock region. So, you know, communities up in the Hillsborough side, all of the Cheshire County communities, including also Hillsborough and Deering area. And so it's a pretty extensive geographic area that is reached through all of these programs. And if we accounted for every citizen out there, and if every citizen gave, you know, $5, $10, it would be a huge portion of the campaign. And you talked about that there's 5,000 that donate. We'd love to see that increase, because if everybody could give, you know, $1 a week or $2 or $5 or $10, it would just make a significant difference. We have about a minute left, by the way, Cam. So any last thoughts? We're going to have to wrap up here.
Well, yes, thank you. Last year, as probably everybody in the Monadnock region knows, was the first year that we hit our goal in 6 years. That effort we're continuing this year with more vigor than ever. The challenges that we are up against is some of the larger campaigns, the larger companies. There's all kinds of changes going on in the business world. And when there's a decrease in a larger campaign, it takes a lot of smaller companies and individuals to make up for it. So I know Peter Hansel would say this as well. What is your local footprint is what our sub-theme to Live United is this year. If everybody would think what kind of footprint we're leaving and how together we can make a path to a better Monadnock region, I think that would go a long way to make this a better place to live.
And we are at the end of the show, so I want to thank you for being here, Cam. I want to thank you for joining us and remind you to give, volunteer, and advocate. Thanks for joining us.